much. Love? Money? Okay. Purpose? How many of you want to have love in your life? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you want to feel like you're living your purpose and making a difference in the world? How many of you want to have more than enough money? Okay? Both hands on that one? Okay. So we're in agreement that they are three universal desires that we all have, right? I want to ask one more question, and I want you to answer this question quietly for yourself. How many of you truly believe you are deserving of having love, money, and purpose in your life? I've asked those questions at workshops and classes, and I've probably asked some of you those questions before. And I've also asked those questions at schools. And I'm always intrigued by the answer that I get for the last question. How many of you believe you are deserving of having all three? And when I first asked that question at a girls' school here in Atlanta to 250 girls ages 10 to 18, on the first three questions, their hands enthusiastically shot up. Yes, for love, and yes, for purpose, and yes, for more than enough money. And then when I asked the last question, only about a third of the girls raised their hand. And they raised it not in the same enthusiastic way, but almost sheepishly saying, yes, I believe I'm deserving of that. And the whole energy in the room went from one of excitement and anticipation to one of almost doubt and disappointment and almost defeat. And when I went home, I sat with that sadness because it really shocked me. After all, this was a girls' school where they're taught to believe they can do anything. And as I sat with that sadness, it hit me. I was that little girl. And probably to some degree, I may still be that little girl that did not believe that I could have all three. At age 40, everyone looking at me from the outside would have said, well, you have love, money, and purpose, Lorri. You have a son who you adore. You have, some of you know, my lovely mom. And I had loving family and friends around me. I was an executive making very good money at the time, so I was very comfortable financially. And I thought I was making a difference in the work that I was doing. So in the way we measure success externally, people would have thought I had it all. But there was something that was missing, and I didn't know what it was, but there was this yearning in my soul for something more that could not be filled by the external world. I knew something was missing, but in the year 2000, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that was. Here's what I did know. I wasn't showing up the way I wanted to as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend, as a boss, as a leader. Here's what I did know. I was going faster and faster on this treadmill called life, but I wasn't going anywhere that was going to produce a sense of joy and happiness in my life. That's what I knew. I certainly wasn't feeling and radiating that I had love, abundance, and purpose in my life. In the year 2000, it was the beginning for me of recognizing that the outside world, the world of effect, was not going to make me happy and give me the peace and joy that I think my soul was yearning for at that time. We've all heard about the 3 F's in response to life situations, right? Fight, flight. The third one is freeze. Well, I took the flight option at the time. I left the job as an executive to become an intern at the Atlanta Girls School. Oh, they want me to take off my ear. Take my earring? Don't bid too much. Thank you. David, you didn't tell me I couldn't wear dangly earrings today. Okay. He's not a girl? Okay. I think I'll continue. Okay. Fight, flight, freeze. You've heard of that term, right? I took the flight option. I went to the other side of the spectrum because of being the executive with having love, money, and purpose in the form that I had it wasn't going to make me happy. If I went to the other side and became an intern at the Atlanta Girls School, that was going to make me happy. I think we have a tendency to do that sometimes, right? We tend to think in binary choices, either or. And anytime we're thinking from that either or perspective, we're coming from lack and limitation. We're coming from scarcity thinking. To think that there were only a couple choices that I had at that point in time, but I thought either I could stay in corporate America and make money, or I could find a job and make meaning in the world. So there were very unconscious beliefs that were operating in me that made me think I had to choose. But remember, I was that little girl that did not think that I could have it all. I had no idea in the year 2000 who Ernest Holmes was, but I later heard the following that spoke to the way I was feeling at that time. And this is what he says. We must have a spiritual rebirth. We must be born out of the belief in externalities into the belief of inner realities. Out of the belief that we are separated from God into the belief that we are part of a unitary wholeness. There was definitely divine discontent operating in my soul because I was yearning and longing for something that wasn't born of the world, but was born the belief inside me. The divine, God, spirit, higher power, intelligence, whatever we want to name it. Is there a time that each of you can remember that divine discontent when you realized that the world out there was not going to give you the happiness and the joy that you were looking for? Do you also remember the time, and for some of you it may be today, that you first walked into the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta and you heard someone from the podium, for me it was January 2012, say, "You are enough just as you are"? Remember that feeling when you first heard that? You are perfect, whole, and complete just as you are. Oh, I so wanted to believe that when I first heard it, right? We all want to believe that. And intellectually, I think we can, right? Intellectually, I think we know that we're born perfect, whole, complete, innocent, in the image of God. But then our conditioning takes over, right? Our human conditioning comes into play. And we begin to unconsciously believe and start operating from a belief system that we're not enough and we don't have enough and we don't do enough. We start operating from what I call our personal lie instead of our eternal truth that we were born with. So that first day that I walked into the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, I knew 12 years later, that what I was somewhat seeking that was missing in the year 2000, that I had begun to find it. Even if I didn't believe it, I knew that that's what I was seeking. Something inside me, the God within me, that knew I was enough. I heard this statement the other day in a study group that I'm in that I want to share with you. And it says, from the womb forward, the ego begins to tell our story. From the womb forward, the ego begins to tell our story. What we see is what the ego has built due to our separation from God. And it hit me. That's when we see with the eyes of the ego, we're seeing the illusion of the world that we talk about. From the womb forward, the ego begins to tell our story. And it is this separation that causes us to live from what I call our personal lie. There are lies that our person chooses to believe. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not wanted. I don't matter. There's something wrong with me. Fake news. Those lies are fake news, right? Last week, Stacy reminded us that we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. 98% are repetitive, 80% are negative. That means we don't have many original thoughts, and certainly the original thoughts we have aren't very positive, right? And Vera, in her talk, reminded us about getting in touch with our feelings. Vera talked about the feelings of shame and guilt, and she talked about forgiveness. So as we look at some situations, I want us to think of both the thought and the feeling. So, let's say I'm looking for a new job. I go in an interview. I think I nailed it. I do really well. I come back. I eventually hear I don't get the job. Those repetitive negative thoughts, the immediate thoughts that may be operating in us, I'm never going to get a job. I'm too old. I don't have the right skills anymore. I ask us to examine what is the feeling that immediately produces those thoughts. Is it the feeling that I'm not good enough? Is that the feeling that causes those thoughts to immediately come into our head? And I think we need to sit with those feelings. You know why? When I first came to this teaching, I loved when I heard this or something better, right? Isn't that comforting at times to know that this or something better, or for us to say that wasn't for me? But I think for this or something better to come true, I think we have to sit with the feeling and understand what really is going on with us, so those negative, unconscious thoughts aren't the operating system that we're dealing with. I don't believe there's separation between our thought and our feeling. I think they're integrated. So I think if we can sit with our feelings, we can reframe our thoughts too. I think if we can sit with saying, that is fake news, I am good enough, that we can change the thought. Perhaps we can have a new thought that says, I know I did my best. And I learned from this experience. And I now am going to feel a sense of satisfaction, and I am going to feel excitement for the next opportunity. we're always going to be triggered by those unconscious beliefs that we have. So next time we are triggered by one of the thoughts that we may not be good enough, perhaps with that initial awareness we can say this: enough already. Not good enough, Ethel. Name you're not good enough. Let's look at another situation. A friend wants to do something really special for you for your birthday. What are some of the thoughts that initially may come up in your mind? Wow, that's really too much to ask. I don't really think they can afford it. I don't know how I'm going to do something like that for them. You know why I think we go there? Because we think we are only entitled to a certain level of good in our life. A certain level of good. So I think it triggers that unworthiness feeling in us. And we know that when we're not feeling worthy, what happens? We have a hard time receiving. Right? We have a hard time receiving. And when we can't receive and when we don't feel that we're worthy, I think what it does is it stifles our desires. Or even if we know what we desire, I think it prevents us from advocating for what we really, truly want. But again, with this awareness, we can do what? We can start exercising that worthy muscle, okay, to know that we are worthy. And perhaps our feeling can be one of gratitude, and our thought when someone wants to do something special for us can be one of, wow, what a kind gesture and gift. If we can shift that feeling of unworthiness to that feeling of gratitude. Not only that, you know what the beauty of it is? If we learn to receive based on our worthiness, the other thing we do is we give the other the gift and the joy of giving. If we can learn to receive. So when our perceived unworthiness is triggered, perhaps you should say, enough already. Not worthy, Wally. Use whoever you want. Okay? One more. I don't matter. Boy, is this one I can relate to on a very personal level. Because this is mine that gets triggered. And if you ever want to know what your personal lie is, agree to talk on Sunday morning at your spiritual home. Because that will bring up some things for you to look at. Why is that mine? It's because I was conditioned, I think a lot of us were conditioned that we matter based on what we do in the world and what we produce, not just who we are. I grew up as the youngest of 5, and I was not going to disappoint my parents. I was going to be the first one to graduate from college. I wasn't going to disappoint them like I perceived my siblings had. So any time that I am coming from a place of thinking that I will disappoint, like today, I didn't want to disappoint all of you, so I knew I was in my personal life. I don't matter. So anytime I'm in that place or I think someone disappoints me, I know that fake news of my personal lie that I don't matter is coming to the surface. And what happens when we think we don't matter? We tend to isolate. We tend to pull back. We tend to suppress our feelings. After all, our worth is based on what we do in the world, not who we are. So I think our beliefs come from our feelings, which is why I think we need to look at those. If our personal lie is the operating system that we're looking at, guess what? We're going to collect evidence that our belief system is correct. We're going to collect evidence. How do we do that? Oh, I don't know why I tried going for that, because I knew I wasn't good enough. See, I don't matter. They didn't include me. I'm not worthy of getting that promotion or recognition. Or I knew eventually that person would leave me. Dale said it when he was speaking about the season for peace and nonviolence. Ernest Holmes says, life is a mirror and will reflect back to the thinker what he thinks into it. I think it's also what we feel into it, what we vibrate into it. The thought and the feeling, I think, is what will get mirrored back to us. Reverend David has reminded us many, many times that this journey that we're on is a process of unlearning. Right? Remember hearing that? So I think it's a process of unlearning this personal lie or the story the ego started telling from the womb forward. And I think it starts with that divine discontent and the yearning in each and every one of us for something more. And it doesn't just happen once. I think it's a continuous process of unlearning and then yearning for something more. For me, it has been one of trading in my identity, worth, value system, and mattering based on performance and what I do in the world, and coming to knowing that I matter just for the truth of who I am. What we heard that first time we walked into the center, that we're perfect, whole, and complete, born in the image of God. I started talking today about desires, and we all agree that we have these human desires to have love in our life, to have a purpose, and to feel like we're making a difference, and to have money. But there's a real paradox in having desires, right? Some of us grew up in religious traditions that it would almost say having desires and wants is counterproductive and in opposition to the spiritual path. How many of you grew up with that type of not having desires? It's actually counterproductive to what we're supposed to believe in. And then others may think that actually manifesting our desires is the goal of the spiritual path. Just as we talked about earlier, we don't need to engage in either or thinking or dualistic thinking around our desires and our wants. They're neutral. They're not good or bad. They are ours, but they're not good or bad. They're not right or wrong. So we don't need to engage in that battle that goes on in our mind in terms of what we truly desire and what we want. Because we know what happens when we suppress our desires and we suppress our feelings. I can't be Coco, but what we resist, persists. Thank you. Okay. We also know that if we get attached to our outcomes or to our desires and those outcomes in specific form, that is what causes suffering. It's not the desire or the want that we have, it's that attachment to an outcome in a specific form. I have 3 questions that I want us to consider as we think about our own human desires. And just our our desires as a whole. What do we really want? What's the cost of what we really want? And are we willing to pay the cost? What do we really want? What is the cost of what we really want? And are we willing to pay the cost? Before we briefly explore those questions, I want to share a passage from the book A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose by Eckhart Tolle. And it's under a heading in chapter 4 called Recognizing Your Child. It says, you are a human being. What does that mean? Mastery of life is not a question of control, but of finding a balance between human and being. And being is capitalized. Mother, father, husband, wife, young, old, the roles you play, the function you fulfill, whatever you do, all that belongs to the human dimension. It has its place and needs to be honored, but in itself is not enough for a fulfilled, truly meaningful relationship or life. Human alone is never enough, no matter how hard you try or what you achieve. Then there is being. It is found in the still, alert presence of consciousness itself, the consciousness that you are. Human is form, being is formless. Human and being are not separate, but interwoven. He goes on to say, only beyond form and being are you equal. And only when you find the formless dimension in yourself can there be true love in that relationship. The presence that you are, the timeless I am, recognized itself in another, the child in this case, feels loved. That is to say, recognized. The longing for love that is in every child is the longing to be recognized, not on the level of form, but on the level of being. So I ask all of us, what do we really want? Is it to be seen for who we truly are? Is it to be recognized, accepted, and appreciated for who we are? My belief is we want our God self and our human self to be as one. And when our human and God self are one, then we can see through the eyes of that one into the world. And we're not seeing through the ego's eyes of illusion. So I think we need to embody both our human desires for love, money, purpose, whatever they are. And I think our truth, desires, those inner realities that Ernest Holmes talked about, to be seen and to be recognized and accepted for who we are. Because everything that we desire in form, those externalities that Ernest Holmes was talking about, comes from the integration with the formless, our inner realities, the truth of who we are. Therefore, every situation we encounter on this journey as we're unlearning is an opportunity for spiritual practice. So I think we need to honor each and every situation, honor each and every desire that we have. Allow it to be our teacher. Allow it to create a level of self-awareness and self-acceptance so we can take inspired action with what we truly want. Every human desire can be realized when it is interwoven with the formless, infinite nature of our soul. There is nothing that nothing that cannot come true in form when it is anchored and integrated with the formless. So perhaps we could spend less time and energy manifesting and spend more time and energy in integrating that God self and that human self as one. So what is the cost of what we want? I think each and every one of us gets to answer that for ourselves. What do we need to surrender to? What do we need to let go of? Perhaps what we need to surrender to and what we need to let go of is that story that the ego has been writing since birth. Maybe that's the cost for what we truly want. And then the last question was, are we willing to pay the cost? That's a personal choice, and it requires personal responsibility. We know in our teaching that we are the ones that are responsible for the human experience that we are having. Ernest Holmes says, "It is the nature of the universe to give us what we are able to take. It cannot give us more. It has given it all. We have not accepted the greater gift." The title of my talk was Enough Already. And some of you may be saying, all right, enough already, Lorri. But I want to leave you with this. I think our soul is always going to be yearning and longing for more. And I think that's the seeker in us. And that's who we serve here at SLCA. So I think our soul is always going to be seeking for more of that alignment of our God self and our human self. But I think the soul is trying to get the attention of our heart for something else as well. And you know what that is? We've already found it. We don't need to always be seeking. We have found it. And you know what I think our soul is whispering to us, and sometimes it gets a little louder when we're able to be quiet and to hear it. Enough already in living unconsciously from the personal lie and the ego story that was written at birth. Enough already in denying what you want and what you desire. Enough already in thinking that the external world is going to give me the peace and happiness that I know I can tap into and that is already in me. Enough already in not living the life that we want to live. That's what I think our soul is trying to get our attention about. Enough already in not accepting the greater gift, which is the promise of the universe for each and every one of us. And so it is.